The slap rang out in the courtroom. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even dramatic, but it echoed through my chest like a bomb that detonated too close to my soul. My father's face twisted into something worse than anger. Disgust, maybe, or worse, indifference. He didn't even blink as his hand snapped forward, sending my mother's wedding ring crashing across the polished floor. For a second the world froze. I looked at her mum. Her face, usually so full of grace, shattered in that moment. She didn't make a sound, just stared at the ring spinning across the room. I could feel the years of silence between us closing in. It wasn't the slap that killed me. It wasn't the words, though they cut deep. "You're trash." It was the way the world around us shifted in that instant. As if everything we had ever been wasn't enough. I didn't understand how we had come to this. "Dad," I breathed. My voice, soft but filled with disbelief, slipped out before I could stop it. I wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. Not anymore. Not from this. "Sit down," my father's voice rang through the room. Cold, detached. I didn't listen. Couldn't. I was standing now, feeling every inch of that badge I had earned. My police cap felt heavier than ever before as I reached for it, placing it down with the finality of a gavel. The weight of my uniform seemed like the only thing anchoring me to reality, the only thing reminding me of what I had become. I had earned this. I had fought for it, fought against everything he ever thought I was, against everything he had ever wanted me to be. But here I was, standing in a courtroom filled with strangers, still carrying his cruelty inside me. The words came, steady but strong. "Your Honor, check the last page." I could see it, the shock on my father's face as the reality of the moment set in. He had no idea what I was about to do. How could he? He thought I was still the little girl he could intimidate, the one who would shrink under his contempt. I wasn't that girl anymore. The air in the courtroom thickened with each passing second. It wasn't just the silence that pressed in on me, or the eyes of the spectators that seemed to fall like heavy stones. It was the realization that this wasn't just about my father and mother anymore. It was about me. My entire life I had been taught to bow my head, to take the punishment, to swallow the humiliation without so much as a flinch. I had learned early on that silence was the price of peace. And for the longest time I had believed it. But this wasn't peace. It was control. And I had had enough of it. I watched the judge flip through the pages, his brow furrowing. The room was so still, the hum of the fluorescent lights above us the only sound that filled the air. Everyone in that room was waiting. Waiting for what, I wasn't sure. But I could feel it in my bones. The tension, thick as fog, suffocating. And my father, sitting there so confidently, so sure of himself, probably thought he had one. "You think you can just throw all this in my face, huh?" My father's voice rang out in a low, venomous growl. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. His face twisting with fury as his eyes locked onto mine. I didn't move. Not even an inch. His anger, his contempt, it didn't scare me anymore. I had faced it for too long. He had tried to break me with his words, with his hands, with his indifference, but he had failed. And here, in this courtroom, I was going to make sure he knew it. Mom's eyes were still fixed on the floor. Her fingers twisted around the crumpled tissue in her lap. I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her it was going to be okay, but I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about telling her that things would be fine. No, this was about something bigger, something I had carried with me for far too long. It was about standing up not just for myself but for her. For all the years she had put up with his cruelty. For all the moments I had watched her suffer in silence, afraid to break the fragile shell of their marriage, afraid that if she did, it would destroy everything we had left. But in this moment, everything had already been destroyed. The house, the memories, the lies. I could feel my heart beat heavier now, each thump like a drum calling me to action. The room was full of people, but it felt empty. Empty except for the man who had destroyed everything I ever believed in. The man who had torn this family apart with nothing but his words and fists. "Enough," I said, my voice steady, echoing in the quiet. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. My father's face twisted with surprise, a flash of disbelief crossing his features. The tension in the room snapped like a brittle twig. Enough. He chuckled darkly, shaking his head. You don't tell me what's enough. You never have. You never will. I'm not your little girl anymore, I said, slowly walking towards him, the weight of every step heavy with years of pain and silence. The words came out with force, and I could see the impact they had on him. He didn't flinch, but I could see it. A crack in his armor. You think this changes anything? His voice was low, a sneer twisting his lips. You think that stupid badge makes you something? Makes you important? The words stung, but I refused to let them touch me. I had heard it all before. Over the years, I had learned that his words had no power. They were just noise. Empty, hollow noise meant to distract, to weaken. But it didn't work anymore. Didn't. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the power behind those two letters was enough. Enough to make the room pause. Enough to make him look at me like he had never looked at me before. And that was enough for me. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me. And yet, in that moment, it felt like I was standing alone. Like I was finally free from the cage I had built around myself. My mother's face flickered in my mind. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel pity. Felt something stronger. Something I hadn't felt in years. Oh, hope that she could finally let go of him. Hope that we could finally be free of the chains he had wrapped around us all these years. Sit down, Anna, my father growled, but there was no authority in his voice anymore. No control. Just desperation. I didn't sit. Couldn't. Not when everything inside me was screaming for me to stand tall, to take back what had always been mine. You know what you are, don't you? My father sneered. You're nothing. You're just a girl playing cop. Trying to pretend like you're somebody. Just like your mother. The words hit harder than I expected. But only for a moment. I could feel the sting, but it was nothing compared to the pain I had endured for years. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. The girl who had watched her mother cry herself to sleep. The girl who had learned to keep quiet, to be the one who held it all together. Whoa. That wasn't me. The courtroom went silent. My father, who had spent years controlling every word, every action, every move I made, suddenly found himself speechless. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was only for a second, but it was there. I knew it, and it gave me strength. My hands, still steady, rested at my sides. I wasn't shaking. Not anymore. I had spent too long living in fear to let his words break me again. This wasn't a battle of words anymore. It was about something far greater. It was about truth. And for the first time I was ready to face it head-on. I had been afraid of the truth for so long, afraid that it would shatter me. But now I understood something that had taken years to learn. The truth doesn't break you, sets you free. I looked at my father, still frozen, eyes locked on mine. His usual sneer had been replaced with something darker, a mixture of anger and confusion. I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out how to regain control, how to turn this moment back in his favor. But it was too late. The silence had already turned against him. Sit down, Anna, he repeated, his voice lower this time, but there was a tremor in it. His arrogance had been replaced with uncertainty. That's when I realized. He wasn't the powerful figure he had always believed himself to be. He was a man who had built his life on lies and manipulation, and now the walls were crumbling around him. But I wasn't going to let him off the hook. Not this time. The judge, who had been observing the exchange with a stern face, finally spoke. His voice was steady, unwavering. Mr. Callahan, he said, please refrain from making threats. This is a court of law, and we will proceed accordingly. My father's eyes narrowed at the judge, but he didn't say anything. He couldn't. He knew he had already crossed a line. He had no power here. Not anymore. I felt my heart beating faster now, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. It was the feeling of something changing, something big, something that would reshape everything I had ever known. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I wasn't just a daughter in this room. I was an officer of the law, and I was here to make sure the truth came out, no matter how painful it was. Mom's face remained stoic, her hands clenched together in her lap, the tissue she had been holding now crumpled into a tiny ball. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, but there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't afraid. She had been through the worst of it, and now she was standing beside me, her silent strength guiding me forward. For years, I had watched her bear the brunt of my father's cruelty. The slamming doors, the insults, the nights she cried herself to sleep while I lay awake, pretending not to hear. I had always wanted to protect her, but I hadn't known how. Now I did. It wasn't about protecting her from the physical blows anymore. It was about ending the cycle of emotional abuse that had held us all captive for so long. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my movements deliberate, my gaze never leaving my father's face. "Your Honor," I said, my voice calm but filled with purpose. "I have evidence that supports what I've said. Evidence that proves my father's actions have been both harmful and malicious." The room seemed to hold its breath. My father's expression shifted from defiance to something colder. His face hardened as if he were trying to brace himself for what was coming next. But I wasn't going to stop now. I'd come too far. I glanced over at my mother. Her eyes met mine for the briefest of moments, and I could see something there, something I hadn't seen in years. It was pride. Not the pride of a mother who looked at her child and saw them as a reflection of herself, but the pride of a woman who had endured everything and was now seeing the result of her strength. I knew what I had to do. I reached for the stack of papers that had been placed on the table earlier, the ones that contained the evidence I had gathered over the past few months. The photographs, the medical records, the police reports, everything. I had made sure every detail was accounted for, every piece of evidence neatly organized, every statement corroborated. It had taken time. It had taken patience. But I had done it. I held the first set of photographs in my hands, letting the moment stretch for just a second. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, but I wasn't intimidated. Not now. I placed the first photograph in front of the judge. It was a picture of my mother's swollen face, the bruise on her cheek so dark it almost looked like a shadow. A bruise that my father had caused. The judge's gaze flicked over the image, and his face hardened. The room was completely still now. I could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was the moment I had been working toward. The truth was out. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This photograph was taken after my father struck my mother. It was taken at the hospital where she went to get treatment. It's just one of many." I placed another photograph in front of him. This one showed my mother's arms, streaked with the marks of years of abuse. The scars that had never fully healed, the ones she had hidden beneath long sleeves, beneath the quiet smile she had worn for so long. I felt a rush of emotions then, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about what I had been through. It was about her. It was about making sure that she never had to go through this again. The judge's eyes flickered from the photographs to me, and for the first time, I saw a trace of something that looked like sympathy. But there was no time for sympathy now. The moment I had feared for so long had finally arrived, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. I had spent too many years shrinking away from my father's cruelty, too many years being silent, waiting for a miracle that would never come. But today there would be no more waiting. I could feel my father's gaze burning into me, his fury building like a storm just waiting to erupt. His fists clenched, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Not anymore. The truth was out, and there was nothing he could do to take it back. "You think this changes anything?" my father sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can take me down with a few photographs? A few lies?" I didn't flinch. I had heard it all before. I had spent years listening to him belittle my mother, to him twist every word, every action to fit his narrative. He had spent years making her feel worthless, making her believe that she didn't matter. But today I was going to make sure that lie was destroyed. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, this is not about a few photographs. This is about a lifetime of abuse, a lifetime of lies. This is about my mother's strength, and how she endured everything he threw at her, hoping that it would end. Didn't. It just got worse. I placed another set of photographs in front of the judge. These were harder to look at. They showed the aftermath of the fights, the broken dishes, the overturned furniture, the shattered glass. They weren't just physical marks. They were the symbols of a home that had been torn apart by someone who couldn't see the damage he was causing. I looked at my father. His eyes were hard now, narrowing with each piece of evidence I presented. He knew that this wasn't just about a divorce. This was about exposing the truth that he had spent his whole life trying to hide. The truth that he had hurt the people who loved him the most. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft shuffle of paper as I continued to present the evidence. I was methodical, precise, knowing that each photograph, each statement, each report was another step toward the justice my mother deserved. But it wasn't just justice for her. It was justice for me, for Leah, for all the years we had spent living in fear. Enough, my father finally growled. His voice barely audible, but I could hear the panic in it, the desperation. He knew he was losing control. He knew that he had underestimated me. You can't prove anything, he spat, looking at the judge. This is all lies. Fabrications. She's just trying to ruin me. The judge remained silent, but his eyes were sharp as he looked over the papers in front of him. He wasn't buying my father's lies. Not anymore. I wasn't surprised by my father's reaction. He had always been like this, never willing to accept responsibility for his actions, always blaming someone else for the things he had done. But I wasn't going to let him do it this time. I wasn't going to let him destroy any more lives. The next piece of evidence I presented was a hospital record. It was from the time my mother had been rushed to the ER after one of his drunken rages. I could still remember that night so clearly. The sound of the door slamming, the shouting, the crash of glass, and then the sudden silence when I found her lying on the kitchen floor, blood staining the tiles. I had been so scared. I thought I was going to lose her. But she had survived. She had always survived, even when he thought he could break her. Even when he tried to crush her spirit, she had refused to be crushed. I watched as the judge looked over the hospital records. His face was hard, his eyes focused. He had seen enough. My father had no more defenses. He had been cornered by the truth, and there was nowhere left for him to run. Mr. Callahan, the judge said, his voice calm but firm, this court takes allegations of domestic abuse very seriously. The evidence presented here today speaks for itself. My father's face twisted into a mask of fury, but I didn't look away. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced him in the darkness for so long, and now here in the light of truth I stood tall. Your Honor, I continued, my voice louder now, this is only a small part of the story. There's more. There's a pattern of behavior that stretches back years. He's been doing this for as long as I can remember. And I'm not going to let him do it anymore. My father opened his mouth to speak, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. I've heard enough, Mr. Callahan. I stood there, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. The worst was behind me. The truth had been spoken, and there was no going back. My father slumped in his chair, his face pale. His eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and rage. He had spent so long hiding behind lies, and now all of it was coming undone. I looked at my mother. She hadn't moved. She hadn't flinched, even when my father had tried to tear her down with his words. But I saw the tiniest spark in her eyes now. Spark of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. The judge turned his attention to my father. Mr. Callahan, he said, this court will not tolerate abuse. You will be held accountable for your actions. My father didn't respond. He couldn't. He had no words left. The room was still, the weight of the moment settling over us all. For the first time in my life, I felt like the air had cleared. The storm that had raged in my heart for so long was finally over. And the quiet that followed was not the silence of fear, but the silence of victory. As the judge spoke, the words blurred together, their weight still sinking in. My father's fate had been sealed in that room, but there was still so much left to process. So much I had to let go of. The finality of it all hit me like a wave, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The courtroom had become a distant, hollow place, a place where the echoes of my father's cruelty could no longer reach us. But it wasn't over yet. The court would reconvene for a full hearing on the division of assets and further measures. But for me, the most important part had already been done. My father's lies had been exposed. The veil had been lifted. And for the first time, I felt the weight of years of silence and pain begin to lift from my shoulders. Mom sat there, her hands still folded tightly, her knuckles pale as she gripped the tissue. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I knew what she was feeling. It wasn't relief yet. It was a quiet exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've fought a war for years, and it finally ends. But there was something more there, something I had never seen before. It was the smallest glimmer of freedom. As the court cleared out, the murmur of voices around us became a dull hum, fading into the background. The noise, the world, everything seemed to blur. All that mattered now was the reality that had finally been acknowledged. The truth was out. There would be no more hiding. I took a step closer to my mom, standing beside her in the now empty courtroom. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I saw something other than fear or sorrow in her gaze. It was strength, quiet, steady strength. "Mom!" My voice caught in my throat, and I swallowed hard, not sure what I wanted to say. She smiled faintly, her lips trembling. "You did it," she whispered, as if she hadn't realized it herself until that moment. "You stood up for me, for us." For a second, I couldn't find the words. I had always wanted to protect her, to be the one who could fix everything. But I had never understood that the most important thing I could do was let her see the truth. Let her see that she was not alone. That she had never been alone. "I had to," I said, my voice steady now. "I couldn't let him keep doing this. Not to you. Not to me. Not to Leah." She looked down, her gaze softening, her hands still trembling slightly as she wiped a tear from her cheek. It wasn't sorrow, though. It was something else. I could feel it, in the way she held herself, in the way she breathed. "We'll be all right," I said, more to myself than to her. "We're going to be all right." Mom didn't say anything, but I could feel her nodding, the faintest movement of her head. She didn't need to speak. She had always been the quiet one, the one who carried the weight of the world without complaining. She had carried all of us, even when we couldn't carry ourselves. Walking out of the courtroom felt different than I had imagined. The doors that once felt like a barrier now felt like an open path. There was no more waiting for the storm to hit, no more bracing for impact. Leah was waiting for us in the hallway. Her face a mixture of confusion and relief. She had been quiet during the whole ordeal, her face pale, her eyes wide, but now she seemed to understand. She looked up at me, and without saying a word, she stepped forward, throwing her arms around me in a tight hug. "You did it," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "You really did it." I hugged her back, the warmth of her small frame grounding me. I hadn't realized until that moment how much of the weight I had been carrying was for her. Leah had always been the little sister, the one I needed to protect. But now, for the first time, I could see that she was growing up. She was strong, stronger than I had ever given her credit for. "We did it," I said, pulling back to look at her. "We're not going to let him hurt us anymore." She nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. I could see it in her eyes, her trust, her faith in me. It wasn't just about this moment. It was about everything we had been through, everything we had survived. We walked out of the courthouse together, my mother beside me, Leah clutching my hand. It felt like we were stepping into a new life, one where the shadows of the past could no longer control us. As we walked down the steps, the sun was setting in the distance, casting long shadows across the pavement. For a moment I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the evening wash over me. The world felt lighter now. The weight of my father's cruelty had been lifted. We were free. But the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. "I'm proud of you," my mother said, her voice quiet but firm. "You've become everything I hoped for. You've become the woman I always knew you could be." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. A lifetime of sacrifice, of silent strength. She had never asked for anything. She had never demanded recognition for everything she had done for us. But here now, in this moment, I saw her. I saw the woman who had held us together, who had survived my father's cruelty and still found a way to love us, to care for us. "I'm proud of you too," I whispered. "We'll make sure no one hurts you again." We didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. The promise had been made. The past was behind us, and the future was waiting. We didn't need anything else. The car ride home was quiet. Leah had fallen asleep in the back seat, her small frame curled up against the window, her breath soft and steady. Mom sat beside me, her hands clasped together in her lap, her fingers tapping rhythmically. I could feel her nervous energy, like she was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. But I didn't feel that way anymore. The world outside the window passed by, the city lights flickering as we drove through streets that now seemed so familiar and so foreign at the same time. For the first time I could breathe deeply, without the tightness in my chest that had always been there. My father's shadow no longer hung over us, and I could feel a lightness that I hadn't known in years. "We did it," I whispered to myself as much as to her. Mom didn't respond at first, but then she shifted in her seat and looked at me. Her tired eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. A mixture of relief and disbelief, maybe. Or perhaps gratitude. "You've always been strong, Anna," she said, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. "You always were, even when you didn't know it." I turned to her, surprised by the weight of her words. She had always been the one to support us, to carry us when we couldn't stand on our own. But I had never realized, not fully, how much she had carried for herself. How many battles she had fought in silence, not asking for anything in return. "I didn't feel strong," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I was scared. All the time. But now I understand. I understand what you were doing. What you were going through." She smiled faintly, her lips trembling as if she was holding back tears. "I didn't want you to see it. I didn't want you to carry my pain too. I wanted you to have something better than I did. Something that wasn't tainted by his hate. You didn't have to protect me from that," I said, shaking my head. "I saw it anyway. I saw it all. I just didn't know how to help you. How to make it stop." The silence that followed felt heavy between us. There was so much left unsaid, so much we had carried in silence, but for the first time I didn't feel the need to fill it with words. There was no more pretending, no more hiding. We had faced the truth, and somehow it had brought us closer, even if we hadn't known how to bridge the gap before. Mom turned her head to look out the window, the glow from the streetlights casting soft shadows across her face. "I never wanted you to feel like you had to be the protector. I wanted you to be a child, to be free of his burdens. But you weren't. You were always so brave, even when I couldn't be." I felt my chest tighten. "You were always the brave one," I said softly. "You kept going, even when everything around you fell apart. I just followed you. You're the reason I'm strong." Her hands clenched, the first sign of tension I had seen in her since we left the courthouse. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face for something. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to grow up with that. I wanted so much more for you. I wanted you to have a life free of fear." "Mom, you gave me everything," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You gave me strength when I didn't have it. You showed me how to survive. And now I'm going to make sure you never have to go through this again." She reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You've already done that, Anna. You've already made sure of that. By standing up. By being who you are. For a long time we sat there in silence, the weight of everything we had been through settling between us. But there was something new in the air now, something I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new, something that we hadn't been able to see through all the years of abuse and silence. When we pulled up to the house, it felt different. The familiar walls no longer seemed like a prison. They seemed like the place where we could rebuild, where we could heal. I didn't know how long it would take or what that healing would look like, but I knew it had already begun. We sat there for a moment just looking at the house. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning inside. The soft rustle of the trees in the yard. Felt peaceful. For the first time in so long it felt like a home again. "I'm scared," Mom admitted softly, breaking the silence. "I don't know how to do this, Anna. I don't know how to let go of all the years of fear of him." I turned to her, my heart swelling with compassion. "We don't have to let go of it all at once," I said. "We'll take it one day at a time. Together." She nodded, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. She had been carrying this burden for so long that it was hard to imagine life without it. But it would come. Slowly. In time. "I'm here," I said, squeezing her hand. "We're here." And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for my own freedom anymore. I wasn't just fighting to escape the shadows of my father. I was fighting for her. For Leah. For the future we would build. For the strength we had, even when we didn't know it. The next few days blurred into each other, a chaotic mix of paperwork, court hearings, and small moments that felt surreal. Every time I looked at Mom, I saw something different in her eyes. Something like hope, but fragile, as if it were a thing she was only beginning to understand. Hope had always felt like a distant thing, something that could be taken away as quickly as it arrived. But I saw it in her now, and it scared me. I was afraid that it might shatter if we weren't careful. Leah was quiet in the days following the hearing, her eyes constantly darting to the door as if she expected him to come crashing through it at any moment. I knew she was scared. I knew she didn't fully understand what had happened in that courtroom. But she would. Eventually. We spent most of the evenings together, eating dinner at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Mom had started to cook again. It was small, but it was something. A return to normalcy that felt so distant but so necessary. We talked about the weather, about the news, about anything that kept us from talking about him. About the past. About the things we had to leave behind. But it wasn't easy. Not for any of us. And sometimes it felt like the weight of it all would come crashing down on us. I could see it in Leah's face, in the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking. And I saw it in Mom too, how she would pause in the middle of doing something, her hands trembling just slightly before she would force herself to keep going. The first night we didn't hear his voice in the house felt strange. Quiet. Too quiet. It was almost as if we were waiting for something to break. For him to come home, to reclaim his place at the table, to demand what he thought was his. But that didn't happen. He was gone. And we were still here. I remember the first night we sat in the living room without him. It was late, and the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could feel the silence, thick and heavy, surrounding us. But it didn't feel like the silence of fear anymore. It felt like the silence before something new begins. Something different. A new chapter. Mom sat in the chair across from me, her legs crossed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was tired, but there was something in the way she held herself, something in the way she breathed, that told me she was beginning to believe it. That maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. I wanted to say something. Something comforting, something reassuring. But I didn't. I didn't have the words. I didn't need to. Leah was curled up on the couch, her head resting on the armrest, her eyes half closed. She wasn't asleep, but she wasn't fully awake either. She was in that space between, where everything felt like it was both a dream and reality. I wondered if she was still trying to process everything, still trying to make sense of the chaos we had been living in for so long. "You're safe now," I said quietly, as if it were a simple truth. It wasn't, not yet. But it was the truth we were moving toward. Slowly. Mom didn't say anything for a long time, but finally she looked up at me. Her eyes were softer than they had been in days, and for a moment, I saw her for who she truly was. Not the woman who had been broken by my father's cruelty, but the woman who had fought for us, for our future. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" she asked, her voice small, almost fragile. I smiled, though it didn't come easily. "We're going to be more than all right. We're going to live." She nodded, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. I understood that. We had spent so long living in survival mode, just getting through the days, just holding on. Now we were going to have to learn how to live again. How to truly live. The next morning the house felt different. Lighter. The air wasn't heavy with anticipation, with fear. It was just quiet. Peaceful even. The sun streamed through the windows, casting long golden beams across the kitchen floor. For the first time the space felt like it belonged to us. Not to him. It was ours. We made breakfast together, something simple, eggs and toast. But it was a small victory. A step toward normalcy, toward a life that wasn't defined by fear. It was something we could build on. Leah was the first to sit at the table, her usual skepticism replaced by something else. Something hopeful. She glanced up at me, her eyes wide, but with a softness I hadn't seen before. I saw the vulnerability in her, the fear of what we were still facing, but I also saw something else. A small seed of confidence, of strength that had always been there, buried beneath the surface. "I'm glad you're here," she said, breaking the silence. I smiled, a real smile this time. "I'm not going anywhere." We ate together, the sound of silverware clinking against plates filling the silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough for now. Later that day I took a walk outside. The sky was clear, the air crisp and cool. It felt like the world was finally settling down after the storm. I needed to clear my head to think. The weight of the past few days had been heavy, and I needed to breathe, to process it all. I walked for a while, letting my mind wander, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The past few months had been a whirlwind, a blur of courtrooms, evidence, revelations, and fear. But we had made it through. And now it was time to rebuild. I stopped by the park, the same park where Mom had taken us when we were younger, before everything had fallen apart. It was quiet, with only a few people scattered around, enjoying the day. I sat down on the bench and watched the kids playing on the swings, laughing as they soared higher and higher into the sky. Felt good to be out here. To feel the sun on my face and the breeze in my hair. I closed my eyes, letting the moment wash over me. I could feel the weight lifting from my chest, feel the freedom that was slowly becoming a reality. It wasn't going to be easy. There was still so much to face, so much to rebuild. But for the first time I felt like I could finally breathe. And that was enough for now. When I returned home, the house felt quieter than it had in years. The usual tension that used to hang in the air like a storm cloud had lifted. It was still there in the corners, like a shadow lurking just beyond sight, but it was different now. Could finally breathe. Leah was sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on the TV, but I could tell she wasn't really watching it. She was lost in her thoughts, as I had been so many times over the years. She looked up when I entered the room, and for the first time, I saw something different in her face. She wasn't just the little sister anymore, the one who needed protecting. She had changed too. Her eyes were a little harder, a little wiser, but still full of that hope I'd seen starting to bloom in her. It was like she could finally see a future without the weight of fear dragging her down. "You okay?" I asked her, sitting down beside her. She nodded, but it was a slow, unsure motion. "I guess. I don't know. It just feels different." "I know," I said, trying to find the right words. "But it's a good kind of different. We're not living in fear anymore." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if she was trying to find the truth in them. And for the first time I realized that she had been living in a kind of shadow too. A shadow of doubt, of uncertainty, of knowing that our lives had always been shaped by the violence and fear that our father had instilled in us. "I don't know if I can get used to it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It'll take time, I said gently. We're going to have to learn how to live again, Leah. But we're going to do it together. We've always been together. She didn't answer, but I could see the faintest glimmer of relief in her eyes. She was still scared, still unsure of what came next, but I could feel the change in her. The weight of the past was starting to slip away, piece by piece. We had a long road ahead, but it was one we could walk together. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about everything we had been through, about how far we had come. The court case was over, but the battle wasn't finished. There were still so many things to face, so many scars to heal, so many wounds that hadn't fully closed. But the silence in the house wasn't oppressive anymore. It wasn't a silence filled with fear. It was a silence that offered space for something new, something better. I turned over, glancing at the clock. It was late, and the house was still. But even in the stillness I could feel the change, the shift in the air. The first time in years I felt like I was in control of my life. Like I was finally moving toward something instead of being dragged behind. I got out of bed, unable to shake the feeling that there was something I still needed to do. I couldn't just lie there. I couldn't let the night pass without doing something. Something that would cement this change, this freedom we were finally stepping into. I knew what it was. I had to make a promise. To myself. Mom. Leah. To all of us. I walked downstairs, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The house was dark, but the light from the street lamp outside filtered in through the windows, casting long shadows across the walls. I stood in the kitchen for a while, my hand resting on the counter, just breathing, letting the weight of everything settle around me. I thought about the years of fear, about how we had lived in the shadow of my father's violence and control, how we had allowed his words to define us. And I thought about Mom, how she had held us together, how she had endured every blow and every insult for the sake of us, even when it nearly destroyed her. I thought about how far we had come, how much we had already endured, and how we had made it through the darkest of times. And then I made a promise. A quiet promise, just to myself at first, but one I knew I had to keep. I'm going to protect you, I whispered into the stillness of the room. We're never going back. The words felt solid, like they were written in stone. Like they were a guarantee, not just a wish. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about standing up for what was right, standing up for the people I loved, and making sure that we never had to go through this again. I walked over to the window and looked out at the yard. The world felt different. It was as if the weight of my father's presence was no longer hanging over us. For the first time I saw the house for what it could be. Not a place of pain, not a place of fear, but a place where we could heal, where we could grow. The night was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to feel it. I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Each one felt like a brick being lifted off my chest. The silence that had once felt suffocating now felt like space to breathe. And while the fear wasn't completely gone, it was different now. It wasn't the kind of fear that ruled our lives, but the kind of fear that comes with change. The fear of the unknown, of stepping into a life that was no longer defined by the past. Mom had started to talk more. She had always been quiet, keeping her thoughts to herself, but now it was like she was slowly opening up. She was allowing herself to feel again, to breathe again. And Leah was the same. Her silence had faded, replaced with small, tentative smiles, and for the first time I saw her growing up. Not as the little sister I had always protected, but as someone who could stand beside me, someone who could face the world without fear. One afternoon, as I walked into the living room, I found Mom sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. The television was on, but she wasn't watching. She seemed lost in thought, her mind somewhere far away. I sat down beside her, my legs tucked beneath me, and looked at her. She didn't notice me at first, but when she did, she smiled faintly. It wasn't the forced smile she used to wear, the one she'd put on for us so we wouldn't worry. It was something more genuine, something I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, what's on your mind?" I asked softly. She looked at me for a moment, as if trying to find the words. "I'm just thinking about everything," she said slowly. "About the past, about how much time we've lost." "You didn't lose time," I replied, my voice firm. "You were just surviving. You did the best you could with what we had." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "I know. But sometimes I wish I had done things differently. I wish I had been stronger. I wish I had left sooner." "You were stronger than you think," I said quietly. "I saw it. We all saw it." She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "I never felt strong. I just felt like I was holding everything together, for you and Leah." "And you did," I replied. "You held everything together, even when you were falling apart. You were the glue that kept us from breaking." She looked away, her gaze distant once more. "I don't know what to do now," she said softly. "It's like I don't know who I am without him. Without that constant fear." I didn't know what to say to that. I understood what she meant. For so long, the fear had been our constant companion. It had shaped everything we did, everything we said. It had been the lens through which we saw the world. But now we had to learn to see the world differently. Without the fear. Without him. "You're still you, Mom," I said gently. "And now you're free. We're free." She nodded slowly, the weight of my words settling between us. It was a truth that was hard to accept, even now, even after everything that had happened. Freedom was a strange thing. It wasn't something we could just take for granted. It wasn't something that would come easily. But it was ours now. And that was enough. Later that evening we sat down to dinner together. Just the three of us. The table was set simply, but it felt more like a celebration than a meal. We talked about the small things. The things that had always been there but that we had never paid attention to. The things that had gotten lost in the noise of our lives. Leah told us about her school project, and I listened, laughing along with her as she described the disasters that had occurred when she tried to glue her poster together. Mom joined in, telling stories from her own childhood, stories I had never heard before. They were simple stories, about her family, about her life before everything had changed. But they were important because they reminded us of who we were before the storm. They reminded us that we had lives, full of stories and dreams, even if they had been overshadowed for so long. As the evening went on, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't just the absence of fear. It was something deeper, something more profound. It was the knowledge that we had survived. That we had made it through the worst of it. And now we had a chance to rebuild. "I want to do something," Mom said suddenly, breaking my thoughts. "I want to do something for myself. Something that's just for me." I looked at her surprised. "What do you mean?" "I don't know yet," she said, her voice uncertain. "Maybe I'll take up painting. Or join a class. I just want to do something I've always wanted to do." Smiled. It was the first time I had heard her speak like this. So full of possibility, so full of hope. "Whatever you choose, you'll do great." She smiled back at me, the expression warm and full of gratitude. "Thank you, Anna." For the first time in years, it felt like we were starting a new chapter. One that wasn't defined by him. One that was ours to write. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything we had been through. I thought about the abuse, the pain, the silence. But I also thought about the strength we had found in each other. I thought about how we had survived it all. Together. And I knew, without a doubt, that we were going to be okay. We had already survived the worst of it. And now it was time to build something new. The next few weeks felt like a blur, but it was a blur I welcomed. Each day, each step forward, felt like an entire life being rebuilt. Mom began to find her rhythm, taking small steps toward rediscovering herself. She signed up for an art class at the local community center, something she had always wanted to do but never had the time for. It was the first real sign of her reclaiming something for herself, and it made my heart swell with pride. Leah, too, seemed to come out of her shell more and more. She wasn't the same frightened girl she had been just weeks before. She was still quiet, still reserved in her own way, but there was a spark in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. It was like the weight of years of fear had finally been lifted from her shoulders, and she was starting to breathe again. But for me, it wasn't just about them. It was about me too. I had spent so long protecting them, holding it all together for us, that I hadn't really stopped to think about what I wanted, what I needed. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. About finding out who I was beyond the badge and the duty belt, beyond the role I had played in holding us together. I started running again in the mornings, something I hadn't done since before everything had fallen apart. The early morning air, still cool and crisp, felt like a new beginning. With every step, I felt myself shedding more of the weight from the past. The fears, the anger, the doubts. It was all still there, lurking at the edges, but I didn't have to carry it with me anymore. Not like I had before. One morning, as I jogged through the neighborhood, I passed by the park where we had spent so many afternoons when we were younger. It was early, the sun just starting to rise, casting a soft golden light over the swings and slides. The park was empty, save for a few joggers and walkers, but I stopped for a moment to take it all in. It wasn't just the beauty of the park that made me pause. It was the memories. The memories of a time when things were simpler, before everything had been broken. I leaned against the fence for a while, just breathing, letting the stillness of the morning wash over me. I had always loved the park, loved the way it made me feel like anything was possible. Like no matter what had happened in the past, there was always a way forward. It was the same feeling I had now. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind us. When I returned home, Mom was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked peaceful, calm, something I hadn't seen in years. I walked over and poured myself a cup, sitting down across from her. "How was your run?" she asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Good," I replied. "It feels nice to be out there again. Just me. The road. No distractions." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I get it. It's like finding something that was lost. Something you didn't realize you needed until it's right in front of you." Smiled. "Yeah, that's exactly it." We sat in silence for a while, sipping our coffee, enjoying the calm. I knew this wouldn't last forever. The quiet moments, the peace we had found, were fleeting. But they were enough. Enough for now. And for the first time in a long time I felt like I could finally breathe. Later that afternoon we went to visit the local shelter. Mom had wanted to volunteer for a while, and now, with some time on her hands, she had decided to start. She had always had a soft spot for animals, and I knew that working at the shelter would bring her joy. As we walked through the doors, the sound of barking and meowing filled the air. There were cages and pens everywhere, each one filled with animals in need of a home. Mom's face lit up as she walked over to a pen with a small, scrappy dog. The dog was wagging its tail furiously, and Mom crouched down to pet it, her smile wide and genuine. "You see that?" she said, looking at me as she scratched behind the dog's ears. "This is what I've been missing. The ability to just do something good. To feel like I'm making a difference." I watched her for a moment, a lump rising in my throat. This was it. This was what I had been waiting for. For her to find herself again. For her to rediscover the joy she had lost. And here she was, in this moment, doing exactly that. "We're going to be okay," I said softly, more to myself than to her. She looked up at me, her eyes soft. "I know. I think we already are." And for the first time in years I believed her. Later that evening, as we sat down to dinner together, it felt like we were finally in a place where we could just be. No more fear. No more doubt. No more pretending. The weight of the past still lingered in the background, but it wasn't the driving force in our lives anymore. We were moving forward slowly but surely. Rebuilding. Finding our way. Leah smiled at me from across the table. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice soft but sincere. I smiled back at her, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest. "I'm glad I'm here too." The following week was a turning point. I had started to see the glimmers of something new forming. Something stronger, something more resilient than I had ever known. It wasn't just the quiet moments at home that kept me going, but the realization that we were no longer living in the shadows of the past. That we were finally truly free. Mom had begun to go to the shelter more regularly, volunteering and spending time with the animals. She said it helped her clear her mind, and I could see the difference in her. She had always been the kind of person who would quietly endure, never complaining about the weight she carried. But now I saw something else in her, a spark of light that had been buried under years of fear and pain. It was small, but it was there. And it was growing. Leah, too, had found her place again. She had started making new friends at school, people who didn't know about the past, who saw her for who she was now, not for the scared girl who had been trapped in the house with me. She was becoming more confident, more willing to take risks, and I could see the change in her. It was like she had been holding her breath for years, and now she could finally exhale. But for me it was still a journey. I had made so many promises to myself, to Mom, to Leah, but there was still a part of me that hadn't fully let go of the past. It wasn't something I could shake off overnight. The anger, the frustration, the bitterness, it was still there, buried deep inside me. And sometimes in quiet moments I could feel it rising again, threatening to consume me. I tried to push it down, tried to remind myself that I was no longer the scared little girl hiding from my father's wrath. But it wasn't easy. I had lived with the pain for so long that it had become part of who I was. A part one didn't know how to get rid of. One afternoon I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets as I made my way down the sidewalk. I had been running in the mornings, but I needed something different, something slower, something that allowed me to think. As I walked, my thoughts drifted to the things we had been through. The court hearings. The late nights spent lying awake, wondering if I would ever feel safe again. And I thought about the moment when everything had changed, the moment when I stood in that courtroom and said, "Enough." That moment had been a turning point for me. It had been the moment when I realized I wasn't just a victim of my father's cruelty. I was more than that. I was strong. And I wasn't going to let him control my life anymore. But as I walked, I realized there was still a piece of me that hadn't fully embraced that strength. A piece of me that was still trapped in the fear, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't just afraid of my father anymore. I was afraid of myself. Afraid of what I might become if I allowed the anger to take over. Afraid of what I might do if I let the darkness inside me grow. I stopped walking and leaned against a tree, my hands resting on the rough bark. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over me. The world was quiet, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace. The weight of the past, of everything I had carried, seemed to lighten for just a moment. But then I heard a voice I hadn't expected to hear. "Anna." I turned around, startled, and found myself face to face with someone I hadn't seen in a long time. It was my father. He stood a few feet away, his eyes cold. His jaw set in that familiar way that made me want to run. I didn't move. Couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The sight of him still made my skin crawl, still made the old fears rise up inside me. But I didn't back away. I didn't run. "What are you doing here?" asked, my voice tight. I felt a surge of anger, but I held it in check. I wasn't going to let him provoke me. Not this time. "I came to see you," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "I wanted to see how you were doing. After everything that happened." I stared at him, disbelief flooding my body. How could he stand there after everything he had done, and act like he was concerned? After all the years of abuse, the manipulation, the control, now he wanted to act like a father, like he cared. "I'm fine," I said coldly. "And you should leave. Now." He didn't move, didn't look away. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "You think you're better than me now," he sneered. "You think you've won." I took a deep breath, my hands clenched at my sides. This wasn't about winning. It was about something more important. It was about the truth. About standing up for myself, for my mother, for Leah. And I was done being intimidated. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I don't think I'm better than you. But I know I'm done with you. I'm done with everything you did to us. And I'm never going back." He didn't say anything at first, just stood there. His eyes hard, his fists clenched. But then, after what seemed like an eternity, he turned and walked away. No apology. No explanation. Just the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. I stood there for a moment, staring after him, my heart still pounding in my chest. But as I watched him disappear into the street, I realized something. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his permission. I had already taken back my life. I had already won. That night I couldn't sleep. My father's face still lingered in my mind, the image of him walking away. His back turned, as if nothing had ever happened between us. Should have felt like victory. I should have felt triumphant, like I had finally done what I had been waiting for. But instead I just felt empty. Like the weight that had once defined my life had been suddenly lifted, and I wasn't sure what to do with the space it left behind. I stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The world seemed so still, so calm. But inside I felt like there was a storm raging. A storm of everything I had been holding in, everything I had pushed aside for so long. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. It was all still there, bubbling beneath the surface. I had spent so many years running from it, trying to ignore it, trying to bury it under the weight of the badge, under the promise I had made to protect my mother and Leah. But now that the battle was over, I didn't know how to face it. I didn't know how to live without the constant tension, without the constant fear of what might happen next. I turned away from the window and sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, and for the first time in days, I let myself feel everything that had been building up inside me. I thought about my father's words, about how he had tried to make me feel like I was nothing, like I would always be his little girl, the one who could be controlled, the one who would never break free. But I had broken free. I had stood up to him in the courtroom. I had exposed him for who he truly was, and I had walked away without looking back. And yet I felt no sense of closure, no sense of finality. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe I was waiting for him to apologize, for him to admit that everything he had done was wrong. Maybe I was waiting for him to acknowledge the damage he had caused, the years of pain he had inflicted on all of us. But that was never going to happen. My father would never apologize. He would never take responsibility for his actions. He would never admit the truth. And that was something I had to accept. I stood up, taking a deep breath. The storm inside me didn't go away, but it didn't feel as powerful as it had before. I didn't need him to acknowledge what he had done. I didn't need him to apologize. I had already forgiven him, not for him, but for me. For my own peace of mind. I walked into the living room where Mom was sitting, her legs tucked under her as she read a book. The soft light from the lamp illuminated her face, and I saw the quiet strength in her expression. She had always been the quiet one, the one who carried the weight of the world without complaint. But now I saw something different in her. Something that had been there all along but had been hidden beneath the layers of pain and fear. She looked up when she heard me enter, and for a moment we just stood there, looking at each other. It wasn't the kind of moment that required words. It was a moment of understanding, a moment where we both knew how far we had come. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. I nodded, walking over to the couch and sitting beside her. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I think I'm finally okay." She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You've been through so much, Anna. I don't think I'll ever be able to fully understand what you've had to carry." "You've carried your own weight, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've carried us all." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm just glad you're okay. That you're safe. That we're safe." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're going to be okay," I said again, more for both of us than for anyone else. "We've made it through the hardest part. And now we can start living." We sat in silence for a while, just being together. It wasn't a perfect silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from peace. But it was the kind of silence that comes from understanding. From knowing that we had survived. From knowing that we would keep surviving. Later, after Leah had gone to bed, I went outside for a walk. The night air was cool, and I could feel the weight of the stars above me, the vastness of the sky, stretching out in all directions. It was the kind of night that made everything seem smaller, less important. The kind of night that made all the pain, all the fear, seem so far away. I walked for a long time, lost in my thoughts. I thought about what came next. What came after the battle, after the truth was revealed? What came after everything I had been through, after everything we had been through? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I knew that I was finally free. Free from the past. Free from the chains that had kept me bound for so long. And for the first time I felt a sense of hope. Not a fleeting, fragile hope, but a real hope. The kind of hope that comes from knowing that, no matter what happened next, we could face it. Together.